All right. Welcome everyone to this session, deep dive into report objects and layouts for Business Central. My name is Steven. I work for a company in Belgium called Plataan, part of Companion, where we do training around Business Central. We have learning journeys, also around a few other subjects. I'm available on social media, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, if you would like to contact me or ask some questions after the session. All right. Today I'm going to talk about report objects and all the ins and outs and how to prepare to create great reports. I'm going to do that in a number of different subjects or topics. I'm going to start to talk about analytics in organizations or the analytical needs, how to prepare, how to think about getting started to create reports. Then we'll dive into a number of different subjects. I will start with data analysis, one of the, let's say, more later additions regarding reporting in Business Central, and how we can use that, what is also coming in the future. Besides that, of course, we are going to dive into report objects. First, we're going to have a look at creating the data sets and preparing the data model. Any kind of report you would like to create, is it a Business Central report, a Power BI report? Data modeling is the most important thing. If you get that right, then the layout should be easier to create. And we'll also, of course, dive into the different layouts with advantages, disadvantages. I've also included a few topics on Power BI because we cannot leave that out when you're thinking about reporting needs in an organization. And we'll also see why that is the case. And last but not least, a few best practices, takeaways I've also foreseen. All right, let's dive into it. Before you open any kind of development tool or create reports, you need to consider the analytical needs in organizations based on, for example, personas or who requires a report. And I'm really thankful that Kenny from Microsoft also included this diagram in the official documentation because it can really help and guide you in preparing the data model of the report, the layouts, choosing what you will need. So the model is based on who in an organization you're building the report for. On the one hand, we see aggregation or data aggregation, which has to do with how detailed the data needs to be. And then on the other hand, the hierarchy within the organization or the person for whom you're developing the report. You could say that the higher in the hierarchy, the more the data needs to be aggregated. And the lower in the hierarchy or more operational persons need more details. And depending on that, you're going to try to figure out what might be the best solution or the best report. And remember, data aggregation. It's one of the most important concepts when you're going to develop reports. I have the same kind of diagram here. And then by the level of aggregation, I've also plotted the solutions that we have within report objects, within Power BI, within other tools. All right. Now, aggregating data means providing totals, subtotals. So it's never a really good idea to send all of the little details, all of the ledger entries into a report or a report layout. Even though users typically request these things, for performance, for manageability, for scaling, it's never a good idea. So you need to aggregate data. Aggregating data means grouping it, creating totals, subtotals, so that the data model of your report is exactly what's required in the layout. Performance-wise, that's also always a good idea. This means you also need to understand where the data comes from and to be able to provide these insights. Now, data aggregation is a concept. Data granularity is also an important concept. So aggregation is a process of combining multiple pieces of information, summarizing it with a certain level of detail. And granularity is kind of an indicator of that level of detail. If you are going to aggregate the data, the more you're going to aggregate the data, the less detail and that you're going to provide, so the smaller the granularity will be. It's one of these concepts that comes out of the BI world that I also used quite a lot when creating Power BI reports. But if you think about it, for normal report objects, any kind of data set or semantic model, it's important to think about what is the exact level of granularity in which I need to offer the information in a report. Keeping in mind scalability and, of course, also performance. All right. Whenever you're asked to create a report, you need to ask a few questions to get the scope right, and to also help you determine which type of layout might be best suited for this certain request. To give you a small example, when I was a junior, I came into the Navision world, and I was kind of a reporting, not really expert, but I had some experience in that. One of the first reports I was asked to create for a customer was, Steven, can you visualize the availability that we have about our items in different locations? Told to the customer, of course, no problem. Took me a few hours to create that report, presented it, and the feedback was, well, it looks really nice, but it's absolutely not what we need or what we wanted. We actually expected something else. Then I started asking a few questions. Okay, what do you expect? And then basically, inventory was supposed to be availability. I didn't really know how to calculate availability. The locations were not the warehouse locations, but basically the customer side, where the inventory was also sometimes stored. So to avoid losing all of that time, ask these questions before you begin. A few questions that can help is what needs to be in the report. So what data needs to be in there? Where does the data come from? Where do we find it currently in Business Central? You can use the Ctrl-Alt-F1 on any page to try and figure out where data comes from. Users might not be able to answer these questions directly, so simply asking them where you have the data right now, where in BC is it, I can help you figure out what are the tables, the relations between the tables, and how to build that into your data model. Then how do you want to use the reports? Do you want to simply be able to look at it? How recent does the data need to be? Is it a problem if that data is 5 minutes old, 1 hour old, the data from yesterday? And are you going to print the report, or are you going to use it in some other way? That is usually going to determine which type of layout might be best suited. Then, very important, what level of detail is required? Now, if you ask the question, the first answer usually is, well, we need all the details. And then the negotiation is going to start, yes, but do you really need these details in the report because you have them in Business Central? If you want to look at the details, go and look there. So what level of granularity, what level of detail is required? How to visualize the data are also important, and because depending on the layout type that we have, we might not have the possibility to do certain visualizations, especially in Power BI, where there are lots of visualization possibilities. Always ask the question how the data needs to be visualized, because even though Power BI has a lot of capabilities, it might not have exactly those visualizations. And then you might opt for another format. A question I also almost always get is, can we export this to Excel? You can create the best report with the best layout. One of the first questions will always be, yes, but we also want that in Excel. So ask that. If the answer is yes, then you need to have a layout, of course, that supports that. You also need to ask, are you going to need to print the report, share the report, email the report or some data from it? Are you going to do that within the organization, that sharing, or do you also need to share information outside the organization? For example, Power BI has great possibilities to share, but usually within an organization, sharing outside is not impossible, but might require a little bit of thinking, especially also about the security of that data. Last but not least, once you have the report, you want to be able to make some changes yourself. Usually, that goes hand in hand with can we export it to Excel, because they want to be able to make these changes. But ask that question also in the context of why do you want to be able to make these changes? The reason might be there is a problem in the process. If a report that is created always needs to be modified, then it means that all of the data in there is not correct. The data comes out of the system, so the process that generates that data, there is usually a problem in there. You can't fix that in the report. The data in a report always shows what is happening. If the data in the report is not showing what you would like it to show, then don't change the report, change the data, change the process. But it's very easy to get stuck in these requests and try to fix that in the layout. That's sometimes impossible. To give you a small example, a long time ago, I was asked to create a sales invoice layout, RDLC. Usually that takes a few hours for a report to modify or create from scratch. No, that particular report took me 20 days to create. And the reason was that every time I showed it to the customer, they wanted some changes. Did you think about this exception? Did you think about that case? No, you didn't tell me when I asked you. Okay, I can build it in. Do you have any other exceptions? No, we don't have any other exceptions. And that went going on for a whole number of days. Of course, I was lucky this was not a fixed price project. But the reason for all of these change requests was that in the old system, all of the flaws and issues in the process of invoicing were fixed in the layout, but there were a few problems that needed to be fixed in that flow. So always ask these questions. This can get you ready to decide what layout and what type of report might be more interesting. Voilà, that was a small introduction, but not unimportant. In Business Central, we have a few tools available. One of the newest, let's say, kids on the block is the data analysis or analyze list page data or query data. And it fits in the lower part of this chart here. We have less aggregated data, but we have some possibilities to aggregate. It's in the client. It's an operational report that we very quickly can create on screen. But before we're going to look into the details, there are also a few permissions you can set on that. So we have this permission set, which you can give to someone to use it or deny to not use this functionality. And also developers also have the possibility on pages to use a property analysis mode enabled and to enable or disable that functionality on pages. Because there might be a few pages where you don't want to enable that. To go into the analysis mode, you need to find the button and simply click on it. On most list pages, it will be available. Then you can get started. I have the screenshot again of that button and the permission set that you can use. If you're going to dive into the analysis mode, you get a window. It has a few areas on it. We have the data area where you can see the data. We have a summary bar. We have columns and filters. And that's basically how it looks like right now. In the data area, you're going to see the actual data that you are working with. At the bottom, for our numerical columns, we're going to see a few totals. In the data area, you might have some buttons, you might have some right-click possibilities. It also depends a little bit on the version of Business Central that you have. On my slides, I have a few features which might not be available yet or might become available in 26 or 26.12 or one of the next versions. Microsoft is heavily investing in this technology. Interesting at the bottom is that you have a summary bar where you see some totals, some aggregates. And these are always very interesting. In my Power BI reports, I also try to incorporate them because they can help you check if what you're looking at is correct. In these pages, normally it should be correct. But in Power BI, a total might not match, for example, what you see in the details. We can select columns. You can do clicky, draggy, droppy in here. You can select the columns you would like to see. You can put them in the row groups. You can select some values to summarize or to aggregate. And there is a tab and you can create multiple tabs in there to create multiple views. You can double-click on the tab to rename it, and it's really nice to play with. And there's also a possibility to go into pivot mode. When you right-click, there is going to be also a possibility real soon, not only to look at the data which is currently in the page, which might be standard fields or custom fields that you have been added via page extensions. But in the future, we'll also get that possibility to find data from related tables. So here I'm starting from customers, and I can also go to locations, responsibility centers, or other sources. And if you click on the other sources, you might get some other tables that are related. And you can also use these fields in your analysis. This is a preview. It's coming real soon. All right. There's also a filter pane that you can use to filter on a number of fields. For certain fields, you will also get some aggregates for date fields. You get the year, the quarter, the month, and so on, that you can also use these things or add it in there automatically. Once you create your views, they will remain in the client. When you reopen the page, go to the analysis views, or they will be there, but you can also export them, right-click, share, and you can send a link to someone within the organization and to directly go to these views. These data analysis views are interesting if you would like an ad hoc report directly in the client. You don't want an extra object, you want to see it directly in a list page. It's kind of an Excel pivot table view on list pages that you can create, that you can customize quite quickly. Within Business Central, once the feature was introduced, that was it, but now Microsoft has also on certain pages added a few default of these views. We have a small overview right here. In the presentation, which is also going to be shared, I added quite a lot of links. You can click on those, go to Docs, and there you can see some more details and screenshots and where you can find all of these built-in data analysis lists. All right, time for a short demo. So I will go to my Business Central here, and you can typically go to a page, and then once the page opens, we have that button right here. Let me zoom in, all right. On which we can click. And then we get the analysis view. On the right side, you can select which columns you would like to use. You drag and drop them in the row groups if you would like to, and some numerical values. On the customer list, I'm simply seeing a few totals by customer. But if I, for example, would go to items, we can get some more information. I have an analysis here that I already prepared, where we basically are seeing the inventory by item. And there's also an availability column that I added in here. This is not a standard column on this page, but a custom column that I created via a simple page extension. And if I go into the code, let me try and see if I can find that page extension. I should have remembered where it is. Let me have a look. Oh, here it is. So I have a small page extension for the item list, which I'm adding an availability field. And it's a very complex calculation. So basically my availability is the inventory plus whatever is on purchase orders minus what is on sales orders. A simple example. We can make it more complex later. Within our page, we can see the availability. If we go to the analysis mode, we also have that field to play with totals and subtotals that can be created. So think about that. If you're looking at the number of pages, you can add calculated fields to make these also more interesting. Once you see your analysis view, you can also jump to a pivot mode, where a few non-numerical fields will then be removed, and it looks more like a pivot table. Here, I'm also looking at my items per unit of measure, and I can also jump to pivot mode to see some details. So in almost any list page, you can use this functionality and add a few views. For example, items by location, by availability. You can also go and find ledger entry pages, also enable it on there. All right, usually that limits us to the data which is in the source table of that page or a few related tables. But you can also prepare your data sets, especially for data analysis mode. And there are a few gains here. Basically, you can create a query object. And if you give a query object a usage category, that means you can find it in the client. If you click on it, then in the results of the search, it will also open in analysis mode. So for any query that you develop, you have that possibility. So this is an API query, as you can see, where I've also added that property. So whenever I'm going to create an API query, for example, for Power BI reports or for something else, by simply adding this property in it, and in the client, we can also use it in the analysis mode, which can be interesting. Even though queries sometimes have a few limitations, it gives you a few more possibilities. So let's have a quick look at that. Let me go back to Visual Studio Code. I have my data analysis items query here. A few properties, usage category is also in there. And let me copy it for the time being, makes it easier to find again. In my query, I'm starting from the item, data item, selecting a few fields which I think that might be interesting. Then I'm going to the ledger entries. Interesting about the query object is that you can use the SQL join that you would like to use, left outer join, inner join, and others. From the item ledger entries, I'm selecting a few fields which I think might be interesting. Then from the item ledger entries, I will go to the value entries. So I'm joining actually these three tables. Interesting about a query object is that you can use methods on a numerical field to aggregate your data, also on date fields to add the year, the month, and the day level. If you do that, you automatically get a group by on all of the other columns. So, okay, this might be a query or an API that we have developed for Power BI or specifically for our users. And because of that property, you can quickly find it in the client. And if you run it, it opens automatically in analysis mode. I have all of the fields available from my query and the related tables. And you can start to also create your little pivot table with totals and subtotals. That I find is really, really, really interesting. Remember that whenever you're going to create APIs, that they might also need to be used in that analysis mode. Now, there's also going to be a small difference. If I'm going to create APIs for Power BI, I'm not going to join too many tables. And if I'm going to create APIs for data analysis mode, joining data is quite interesting. Normally, in my session, I was not really going to talk a lot about Copilot or AI. I think there might be quite a lot of other sessions that dive into that. However, in data analysis mode, there was also a Copilot button on which you can click. You can type in a simple question on that item list, show me the items by type and unit of measure, and it will simply generate that view. Usually creating the view yourself is almost as fast as asking the question, but this might help if you have quite a lot of fields on that page. I'm not going to demo it right now. It's very easy to do. And a few tips are also that for your prompts, you need to be precise. So be concise. Use the field names as they're known in the application. You might not need to say inventory, you might need to say quantity on hand. That helps it. Natural language, common keywords are also recognized. Some sort by group, by this, by that, and so on. And you can also provide some follow-up instructions in your prompt to get a better result. Lowercase, uppercase doesn't really matter. So that's a nice feature. All right. So data analysis, remember that it's something that we have in the client to quickly be able to aggregate and summarize some data. Next topic I would like to talk about are report objects. I'm going to spend some time here, first in the data model, then the different layouts with advantages, disadvantages. Last but not least, testing is also important. I don't have any specific slides on testing, but whenever you create a report, please test it and foresee the time to test that. You need to print or preview the report, look at the results. Are they the same exported in the desired formats? Especially with RDLC, there might be a few different ways on how margins are calculated. And you might end up with blanco pages between pages with data. So these things you might need to test. Printer settings are also taken into account. Usually the PDF preview is what it's going to look like, but might be worthwhile testing it anyway. For reports, creating the data model is very important. So there might be two, let's say, kind of situations on how you might want to create a report. On the one hand, you might be a developer, and then you have your hands on how the data model is created. On the other hand, you might be a consultant. Then you have to work with the data as it is provided. But it's important that you understand how the data model is built, and because that will make it easier or less easy in the Word layout and RDLC layouts and so on. So I've foreseen a few examples that I would like to quickly look at in the data model. A list, one table. If you have multiple tables or data items, how to do a union, how to do a join in a report, left outer join, inner join, cross join. Using a query, the data model that we typically have in documents and why that is the case. Using an integer, what might be the advantage of doing that? A buffer table, and then a simple example of being able to quickly dynamic encode switch the current layout of a report. All right. So I'm going to have a look in Visual Studio Code. I have prepared a few reports for that. All right. When we start with a list report, I typically mean a very simple data model, one data item with a few fields. There might be also some numerical fields on there. That's it. We then also have the possibility to add layouts in the rendering section. Usually I will have one RDLC, Word, and Excel layout, but you can have multiple ones. And as the developer of the dataset, you also say what is going to be the default one. All right. If I'm going to run this report in the client, let me quickly do that. Even before you create the layout, it might be very interesting to simply send it to Excel data only, to have a look at what is the data set at runtime and what is the data set at design time. How did I organize my data items? And we simply will then see the resulting data coming in, voila, one table with a little bit of data. Creating a layout for that is quite simple. Once we have our rendering sections defined, the empty files will be created. I can go to RDL, open it with Report Builder or Visual Studio Code. Report Builder 2016 is what you need to install. If you would like to work with Visual Studio, that's also possible. In the documentation in Docs, it's talking about Visual Studio 2019 with a certain plugin. But if you install the latest version of Visual Studio 2022, it will also work. Then you can also find that VSEX file to be able to render the RDL. In the layout, we get a few fields, as you can see right here, fields in the dataset. For numerical fields, there's also going to be a format code in here. And then I can simply insert a table and then add a few fields in there. Voila, that's it. Very simple to do. In the Word layouts, if I would like to create a simple list, then we are simply going to open Word. And in Word, the first thing that you might need to find is the developer pane. If you don't have that developer pane, you can simply right-click anywhere, customize the ribbon, and then here enable developer. From then on, it will be in there. All right. I will go to the mapping pane. That's where I will see my data sets. It still has the name Dynamics NAV, but I can see my data item in here, which is a customer. Microsoft also recently added a default data item for the word layouts with some metadata that you might want to use too. All right, to put this data in here, typically in Word, I'm going to insert a table. It will have a header row, it will have a detail row. I select the detail row and make that a repeater for the data item that I would like to have repeated in here. And I add the fields in here. There is no clicky, draggy, droppy. That would be too easy. You have to right-click and then select the content control that you would like to use for your fields. There might be some plugins from other companies that allow you to do drag and drop. All right, simple data sets. So one data item, don't think it then really matters what kind of layouts that you want to create. Second example is how to do a union. So as a report developer, what we are going to do is we're simply going to add two data items right below one another. And it's then at runtime going to create kind of a unioned result set. Not completely the same than how a union works in SQL. In SQL, you have to have the same column names. We'll have one result set with, in this case, 3 or 4 columns. Here, what will happen is that the first data item will be processed, then the second data item, and the result set of both are kind of glued together. So I'm quickly going to also have a look at that result set. And it's important to always check that because you need to know where the data is in the runtime result sets to be able to consume it correctly in the layouts. So I have my customer data in here, and I have the vendor data. While it's processing the customers, you will have NUNL values for the vendors. And in the layout, you might need to filter those out. I've also provided a few, let's say, URLs in here or email addresses. You can use them, interestingly, in the Word layout, for example. Right, that's the data set. To create the layouts for a union in RDL or RDLC, that will be a little bit more work. Because in the data set, we always have one data set. The name is always the same in the RDLC layout. It's called dataset result. And I see the columns of customer, I see the columns of vendor. And the difficult thing is, for example, being able to split these into 2 tables and not show the empty rows in there. Construct, what we then typically do is filtering or hiding. On the left side, I have a table where in the tablix properties, I have added a filter. And the field that I'm filtering on is basically the customer number. If the customer number is empty, I don't want to show the data. But trust me, it works better if you first convert it into a string, because customer in Business Central is a coded data type. Here I am in VBA. So to really do the matching correctly, you need to use the cstruct function to convert this. Then I'm going to say this value needs to be bigger than the empty value, between double quotes in here. And you can choose different from and so on, but also, trust me, it works better if you say bigger than if you say different from. Don't know why, but that's basically my experience. And that way, I am able to filter out data in this table to fetch the data in the data set that comes from the customer data item. So in RDLC, that requires some manipulation. Another way of doing that is by, for example, adding a visibility rule on the detail row. I will go here to the row visibility. I can create an expression for when the row needs to be visualized or not. And voila. I'm saying that if the vendor is empty, hide the row in this vendor table. These are usually the 2 ways that you can do that. And I'm showing both ways. Because, for example, in the document layouts or the RDLC layouts, sometimes they use the filtering way, sometimes they use the hiding way, depending on who developed the reports. So in RDLC, that might require a little bit of manipulation and knowing that VBA language. In Word, and that's what I was really happy about when the word layout was introduced, we don't really need to do that. In the word layout, it is as simple as looking in your data model. And in the word layout, you're not going to see one, but you're going to see the two tables. You can quickly see that they are on the same level. So this is basically a union happening. And I'm going to create a table, insert a repeater for customer, another table, insert a repeater for vendor, and these tables will be automatically filtered to that data item. So you don't need to provide any other filters. That's a fun thing about words. All right. So if you have unions somewhere in your data set, what you need to remember is that the word layout might be easier. Or if you want to create a word layout, union your data sets. A join, of course, that's also a possibility. I'm joining here customers with customer ledger entries. You need to provide the data item link to do that. And sometimes sorting. The reason why I do the sorting is not because I want to sort, but because I don't want to have the second ledger entry data item pop up in the request page. And by sorting, you can then remove that. If you do not specify a data item link and you also do not specify print only if detail, you get a cross join, which is the Cartesian product of the two tables. All records will be connected. If you provide a data item link and you do not provide print only if detail, then you get a left outer join. If there are customers without ledgers, they will still be in the data set. And if you do print only if detail in here, you get the inner join. You can define that as a developer, hard-coded, using the properties. However, there's also a print only if detail method that you can use if you want to run the report by code using a report variable, and where you can disable or enable that print only if detail property dynamically. So you don't need to create multiple reports if one time you would like to run it to the left outer join, the next time an inner join. If you're going to join data, you will kind of get an aggregated data set, which works best then in the RDL layout. The advantage of the RDL is that we can create a table. Let me zoom in here, and then in that table also a few groups. I start with the details, and I'm going to create a few parent groups. So the little trick here is to simply start with a table, put the numerical data in here or the details that you would like to see, and then remove all of the other columns. For example, the amount. Starting from here, I'm then going to add parent groups. And I'm going to say, okay, I would like to see the amount by a customer. I would like to see a total, so I select customer, and you can add a header and or a footer. Voilà. Then I have a group in my table. I will see each and every ledger entry. I will see the summary by customer. To see that summary by customer, we're also going to add the amount field in here, click, right-click, and then summarize, for example, and calculate the sum. All right. The scope will automatically be the group, so we'll get a subtotal by customer. You repeat that process, and you can also group by any of the other fields. And within the RDLC layout, we can very easily create and aggregate our data, which is a big, you could say, advantage. So if you have joined data items, the RDLC layout seems to be a nice one to use, because it can also aggregate and group and visualize that data. The word layout, not actually the best layouts for when you are joining data, but not impossible to do. So if we go into our data sets quickly, and you can also very easily see that these two data items are joined. Ledgers belong to customer. And what I'm then typically going to do is I will start by inserting a table, header row, and then the repeating row. For the repeating row, I will insert a repeater for the customer data item. I typically also leave a cell blank or some room in there. Here I will then add another table, and for that table I will create a repeater for the ledger entry data item. So you can have nested repeaters in the Word layout, and that is possible. All right, if we do that, and we are then going to run our report in the RDLC layout, it's going to look quite nice. But in the Word layout, even though we have the nested tables, let me quickly change layouts. It is going to display that data. I'm seeing my customer information, and for that customer, the ledger entries, and they are correct. Then the next, customer, my mouse is a little bit fast today. The next customer, but then the other ledger entries. All right. The problem with the RDLC, with the Word layout, is that we can see the details, but we cannot really calculate these subtotals. So it's something we can't really do in that layout. All right. Next example is using a query. The reason is performance and aggregation. So here I have a simple query called customer ledgers. Fetching information from the customer table, also doing a join with the customer ledgers. You can then specify the exact join type you would like to have. The fields, and then also the methods per year, per month. I would like a subtotal of the amount. This query, I can, once I have that, use it to build the data set of a report. It's not very difficult to do. You create your query variable. From the query variable, you simply add a few fields in the data set coming from the query. Really easy. And then a few lines of code. Of course, you need to have your query variable in here. And as a data item, I'm going to use my integer data item. I'm not going to filter it in the properties, but I'm simply going to break it when there is no more data to process. So open the query. Open runs the query, leaves a data set on the server, but doesn't return any data yet. And then in the after get record, I will read record per record until there are no more records, and I'm going to break. So a few lines of code, and you can kind of use almost any query in the data set of a report. Advantage is performance. Performance of queries will be a lot faster than simply joined data items. A second advantage is, let's say, the aggregation possibilities of queries to calculate these subtotals. So you will have the data that you need in the data set a lot faster, and usually smaller data sets. So also very easy to do. A disadvantage of this approach is that in a query, you could say, unfortunately, we can't really do any programming, can't define a record variable and calculate availability in AL code. That's not allowed, basically. So if that's something you would like to do, then a buffer table might be a better example. Let me also show that, open to the side. So a buffer table, I've created a table in here, a customer buffer, which I'm going to use as a temp table in my report in the data set, with a few fields, customer number, customer name, and the sales amount. That's a table that I've created. And what I'm then going to do is, the idea here is to create a top 10 report. Now, in RDLC, you can say it's very easy to do a top 10 filtering. There's a property for that. But then you might have a very big data set and only show these 10 customers. The idea is to have the 10 already in the data set, no more, no less. That's best for performance. So I am first going to process my customers. I'm going to loop over all of my customers to be able to identify the top 10 ones that I would like to have. I'm going to clear my buffer table, and in the after get records, I'm basically going to insert a record in my temp table and also get the total sales amount for that customer. Voila, that's it. And then I have a second data item using integer, which is going to fetch the data from the buffer table and display it here, top 10 buffer in the results. A little bit of code in here and the on-pre data item to sort, maybe to rank your information. Right now I have this top 10 hard-coded in here, but you can also make that quite dynamic. So a little bit of coding, but then you can programmatically calculate a few things, add them in your temp table. You have the integer data item, which is the resulting one, and that you can then consume in your layout, Word and or RDLC. So that's kind of the workaround for the Word layouts. You can calculate stuff in the data sets using buffer tables or other techniques. And then once you have that data item, you can simply link it to a table in the Word layout. That's buffer. Another data design tip actually is working with integer. What I see quite a lot in reports from developers, but also some out-of-the-box reports, is that we have the data set, then we also would like to include a company name, company picture, and all of these things. We simply add them in a connected or a joined data item. If you do that, the problem is that all of these company logos will be repeated on every line in the data set, which is, let's say, suboptimal for performance. So it's much better that you, for example, add a top-level data item or one at the end of your data set using the integer table to fetch one row, to add one row in the data set, and there all of the information you only need once. This adds one row in the data sets with that information. Very simple to do, with an enormous performance improvement. Interestingly is that then in the Word layout, it makes it even easier because you will have a data item customer with the data that you need and another data item header text, which you can also put in another table with that data company logo, for example. Also for the RDLC layouts, more interesting because we have a more performance report. But if you create a table in the RDLC layout where you show information, in this case customers, don't forget to filter out that one line from the integer data item. All right. In a document, and we also have a few things that are important. So I try to recreate data set of a document, which is typically a join between a header and a line data item with a few fields and a few options. What is important there? Well, typically a document needs to be generated in the language of the recipient, not the language of the user running the reports. So we are going to add field captions only for the fields that need to be multi-language, not for all of them. And then typically in the on-after get records, we get the language code of the header, which is typically the language code of the bill to customer, to switch language in the report and to create a data set with the labels in the language of that recipient for that invoice, for example. If you want some company information in there, we also have a separate data item. Here we have the integer in the end instead of in the beginning. All right. What else are we going to do? I can provide a few layouts. It might be interesting to skip the execution of the report if the user did not filter in the request page, to not accidentally print all invoices. This code, by the way, is in report 1306 by default. And then you can create a layout. Now, creating a layout for this report in RDLC is not going to be really difficult, depending on what you want to do, of course. Let's jump in there. What I typically have in here is a table. And in the table, I might have some grouping, have some header information, I have some details. So you're simply going to create a few groups. If you would like, for example, every invoice to start on a new page, then I can highly recommend you to put that table in a list. So typically in RDLC, we're first going to put a list container in there. All of the other tables go in there too. In that list, in the details, you might want to add a group, for example, on the document number. And when you add that group, you simply click on the page break property to get a new page per invoice. And this you do on the list and not on the table. And typically in that list, you might have multiple tables that show how you control your page breaks. In the word layout, let's have a look here. I have one from Microsoft here. For the more complex data sets, you can also have all of your fields there. What you're going to notice is that we have that more complex data set. We have the header with all of the fields. We have the lines. We have all of the other data items. And then what you're typically going to do is add a few fields that need to be on top of the document, a picture. And then, for example, a table with or without some groupings and or subtotals. So like we have done actually before. To be able to have that new page per document, it is then important in your data set that you specify the word merge data item property and put it on the header. And that will then basically take care of that. So don't forget that it's very important for the word layout. All right. So these are a few examples of how to create a data set, union, join, and or a combination, which is what will typically happen in a document. All right. Then, because I'm going to talk about layouts a little bit later. Well, last one I wanted to show you is this report, item list. That's a report where I have, for example, two layouts. I have two word layouts, an orange one and a blue one. And a question is sometimes, okay, in the RDLC layout, we can use conditional formatting. We can dynamically hide or show something. So one layout can serve multiple purposes. We don't have these expressions in the word layout, but for example, you can simply create two different layouts with two different controls. You can say which one is the default. And when the user runs the report in the request page, they can always switch very easily. However, if I'm going to run this report, I always have to switch in the request page. So what have I done? I have created another page that will run my report. Let me go in there. If I run this report, I will get its default orange layout. But if I run it updated, it will by default come with the blue layout. So you can programmatically control and change the default layout of a report. Now, I'm not the most amazing programmer, but I found a little bit of code online on Yammer to help me do that. So basically, in the code of that button, I'm changing which is the default layout currently for this report. I set it to orange, and here I'm setting it to blue. And basically what you need to do is work with the report layout list table and there change the default layout. You can do it per company, also per user if you would like to do that. Here you quickly change that. So instead of creating all of these expressions in an RDLC layout, you can simply create multiple word layouts and dynamically encode a switch and determine which one needs to be run depending on certain conditions. All right. Voilà. These were a few things I wanted to show about dataset design or using data items. I can talk about it a lot longer, but it's important to remember that if you're going to join, and an RDLC might be easier as a layout. If you're going to have unions, that's very good for the word layout. Or if you need to use a word layout, try to work with unions. All right. Features of the different layouts are also important. The word layout, you can print it, you can export it to a PDF, you can email it, and the advantage is that you can have the report as an attachment in an email, but also in the body of that mail. That's a reason sometimes to create multiple word layouts for the same report, one for attachment, one in the body, which is a little bit summarized. We can't use expressions. However, there's an add-in which I'm also going to cover, which is going to simulate a few things and in the future might hopefully give us conditional formatting and some expressions in the word layout. RDLC, okay, we can export to PDF, we can email it as an attachment, but not in the body. It supports expressions, which is nice, but performance-wise, not always that great. In theory, you can do pixel-perfect editing, but I think that's mostly theory. Okay, you can position text boxes, but it's not always that easy to do. And the reason why Microsoft is not recommending to use RDLC anymore in the performance guidelines is not because RDLC has a bad performance, but the way that it's executed. In RDL, you can use expressions. In these expressions, that could be .NET interop that you are using, and .NET interop is not allowed in Business Central, it's not safe. So to guarantee the safety, whenever you run a report with an RDLC layout, it is sent to a separate standalone sandbox. There the report is executed, and then the result is fetched back into the client. That takes time and resources to do, so that's why it's a little bit slower. Excel layouts, interesting. We're also going to have a look at those in a few moments. We can't really print them yet directly from AL code. You can download the Excel file, but you can use pivot tables. You can use slicers, all of your Excel skills, Excel formulas, Power Query, and also Power Pivot. All right. So if we dive a little bit deeper into the different layouts, we have the Word layouts. Word layouts typically need to be printed. If you're not a developer, we typically go into the report layouts page, and there we can create new ones based on an existing data set. I have the steps laid out right here. And we have some buttons. If you would like to create a new layout, you first run and export an existing one, and then you can use that as the basis for a new one. Same also basically with RDLC. In the word layouts, you have your mapping pane, and you typically create a repeater for the data item in a table row where you would like the data to be repeated. And then you can use your word design skills to design reports. There might be quite a big difference between looking at the report in design time at runtime, so a lot of testing and trial and error might be required. But still, there are quite some options available. Besides creating a simple layout, there is also some very good documentation online that explains how to use all of these things. Headers and footers, how to use tables, how to create lists, how to use sections, and so on. And these are a few tips and tricks I would like you to take away or use when you're going to design Word layouts. So I've foreseen a few bits and pieces about that. So in Word, what is really interesting is that we can use headers and footers. We can have different headers and footers for the first page or for other pages. You can put the break also in there if you would like to do some testing, but then don't remember to remove that break. So headers and footers with formatting is possible. In RDLC, we also have headers and footers, but they are a little bit limited. Then, if you're going to put fields in a word layout, you don't want to repeat anything, but fields or images, you can simply add them in there or add them in tables. So one tip I would like to give is put these in tables. At runtimes, you will not see these tables, but tables help to align fields more easily, even images. Here I have an example of company name and a picture in one table, but for a picture you could also say I'm going to use a one-on-one table, only the picture in there. And it can also control alignment, but also growth of images in Word layouts. At design time, you can also enable grid lines. There's a button for that. I have it marked right here to see where something is positioned. Don't remember to uncheck that then afterwards. With pictures, you can also use tables to control how they are going to fit, that they're not going to overflow. Within the cell of that table where you put the picture in, there are also a few properties to adjust spacing. And you can also disable via property the behavior of the cell to automatically resize. So that might be interesting to do. Something else performance-wise for pictures, which is also important, is compressing. So in a picture in the Word layout, you can go to the picture format tab and you can click on compress picture, which will then at runtime compress the data, which will make it a smaller layout and a faster report. Simple property to click, that's all that you need to do. So in the Word layouts, I'm going to use tables, not only for header and repeaters, but to basically kind of position elements. If you have a table, you can put a repeater in there. It can be multiple nested repeaters, as I've shown you with the join report. In the documentation, it says as many nested repeaters as you would like to, but I usually don't do more than 2 or 3, to be honest. All right. Lists is also interesting to use if you like a bulleted list or a numbered list with some data in there. You can start by creating a list in Word and then also put a repeater in there. It doesn't always have to be a table, so that's also interesting to do. And the details I also have here. With nested repeaters, it can sometimes be difficult to see where is what. So don't go too many levels deep, but I basically have showed this before with a small screenshot on the slide to emphasize. If you work in tables, you can also resize columns and try to position a little bit where data needs to end up, but I should be honest, it's not always the most fun to do in the Word layout. Regarding totals and subtotals, well, we can't aggregate in the Word layout. So basically, the idea there is to use a buffer table or to have a data item in the data set that has the detailed data and another data item that has the totals or the summarized or the aggregated data. And these two separate data items, you can then bind to different tables in the Word layout. And that's also how it's done in the Word layout of the sales invoice. Same for conditional formatting. We don't have those limitations, those possibilities right now. A few other things. If you're going to use styles for tables, and you can right-click on a style and you can select a default, which is applied on any table that you will have in your Word layout. Hyperlinks, that's also something that you can use. So if, for example, you have a dataset customer where you have an email address, where you have a URL, you simply have those fields in the dataset, you put them in a table in the Word layout, and automatically at runtime you can click on those and you can navigate to the website, and also if you save these as a PDF. You don't have to do anything special, just have the email address in the dataset and the links. In RDLC, you can also do that, but in RDLC you have to go to the text box properties and enable the hyperlink property. Sections, that might be the best tip to use in the Word layout. In a Word layout, you can create different sections which have different properties, formatting, paper size, for example. You can have sections start on the next page, but also in the same page you can create multiple sections. And you have more control on what happens. For example, this is also one report where the first page is portrait and the second page is landscape, by simply using sections and changing that on there. So that might be interesting to do. Fonts, there are quite some fonts that you can use. The whole list is also available on Docs. These are pre-installed and available by default. Don't think you can add any other extra fonts. Also in tables, in the Word layout, in a table, go to the properties, and there are table properties, there are row properties, column properties, and cell properties that you can play with to try to align the data which is in there. You can do that relatively, but also absolutely. I also have an example of that in a few moments. So for a table, for example, you can go into the table properties, you can set the text wrapping to around. If you set the text mapping to around, the positioning button becomes enabled. You can click on it, and then you can go for an absolute positioning of that table, if that's what you would like to do. So that can be also interesting to remember. All right, so the word layout, it has a few limitations. It cannot do a few things that the RDLC layout can do. However, Microsoft is working on that. If you need to be convinced to stop doing RDLC and to move over completely to Word, we need some extra bells and whistles in the Word layout. And there's an add-in for that that Microsoft has created. It currently has these functionalities, but more is coming. And what might come in the future, I really hope that, is conditional formatting and also being able to have conditional visibility of controls in a layout. That would already be a great step forward. Currently, it's height, a field, a row, a column, and adding some comments in there. The first thing that you need to do is in the Word layout, you go to Home, get add-ins, and you look for the Business Central Word add-in. You install that, and then you will have it available in the Word layout under a new tab called Business Central, with then a button in here. Once you have created a table in there, you can select, for example, the table, say height if empty. You can select a row in there and say height if empty, and so on. You can also insert comments in your Word layout, which might be interesting to do some versioning of layouts. So we have an example in here of a comment. And at design time, you're going to see these comments. This is a customer table, this is a vendor table. And for example, at the bottom, I have inserted a table with some versioning information, who designed this layout or made which change at which moment and so on, versioning table. At design time, nice to have, but if I'm going to run the report, these things are not going to be visible. Another example is to mimic blank zero and blank numbers. We can also use these heights if empty. So on the left side, if an amount is zero, you will see it. On the right side, you're not seeing that. Well, amazing, but okay, it's something that we were unable to do that we can do right now. If you don't have that add-in, this is also something you can simulate in the dataset, because if in the dataset a field does not have a value, it will not be rendered in the Word layout. So you programmatically can also make something empty, clear it, and then it will also not be rendered in the layout. All right, so for the Word layouts, I think I have already demoed most of these, if I remember correctly. One thing that might be interesting and that can serve as inspiration is this. If you'd like to be convinced on what you can do with the Word layout, it might be interesting to look at this report or one of its siblings. This is a clone of 1306, a standard sales invoice, where Microsoft redesigned the dataset, optimized it for the Word layout. And there's also interesting layouts that you can have a look at. You can get this out of the base app, and you can have a look at the dataset, quite some fields in here. What is interesting is that the way that the dataset is changed is that all of the fields have been given quite good names, data items too, so that if you look at those in the Word layout, that you, by using the name of the table, kind of know what is in there. And if you also look at that data set, you have to scroll down a little bit. We have the typical data set of a document. Then at a certain point, you're going to see quite some other data items coming in with unions of data. Work line, description, VAT, amount lines, with or without details, unioned with header information, footer information, VAT clauses, and so on. Report totals, report header left side, report header right side, and so on. All of these data items are unions. And the reason why this is done in the data sets is that in the Word layout, it makes it a lot easier to visualize. So in the Word layout, of course, we have our table with the details, but we also have other separate tables with totals in here coming from the new data items or the redesign of these data items. All right, here it is. You can see the header, and if I scroll to the bottom, you can see all of the other data items. And for example, we have buffer tables or integer tables, calculating information, especially for the word layout. And the idea is that you get different tables in the word layout, which you can then map to tables in the layout itself. So different data items to tables. All right. What you can also do when you create a Word layout is to create more professional-looking reports. One possibility would be the following. You start with Word, and then, in Words, File, New, actually, and you can use, for example, some templates. So if you would like to create an invoice report, it might seem silly, but you might want to look around for one of these standard invoice, nice-looking reports. If you say, okay, this is a layout I would like to use in Business Central, and you create a Word file with that nice-looking layout. And then you need to strip it a little bit. So basically, if there is a table in there, I'm going to remove all rows except one. Delete cells, delete entire row, voilà. Until I have something which is looking nicely. What I can then do is file save as, and then also save it in the folder where the report is, and in Visual Studio Code, do a Ctrl-Shift-B to have the data set in the Word layout. And then you can go to the XML mapping pane, and for this row, for example, add a repeater, and then simply replace a few of the fields in here with some fields of the data set. That's something interesting way to get started. Another way to get started is maybe to convert an RDL layout to a Word layout or to start from an existing document. Okay, these are a few tips that you can do. An RDL layout, you can run it. In the request page, you can send it to a Word file. And then you have a Word file, and you can start with, you can strip it, you can put the data set in there, and so on. So that's something might be a way to work. However, I wouldn't really recommend that, because the Word layout of an RDLC file, that's not always that great, but it's one of the possibilities. Another way to get started is that you get an existing invoice from your customer in a PDF format. You open Word, in Word file, open PDF, PDF converted to a Word file, and voila, you have something also to get started with, which you can strip, put the data set in there, and continue. So there are a few ways on how to get started there, if you want better looking layouts. All right, so you can use the Word layout also in the body of the email. You can also do that on customers and vendors to have customer-specific, vendor-specific exceptions. This is how the email looks like, but that's not really new functionality. It has been in here for a long time. But if that's something that you would like to do, then the Word layout might also be very advantageous to use. All right, I have about 20 minutes left and a few things to show. No worry, I'm still on schedule. RDLC layouts. That's an alternative for the Word layout. The advantage is that we can do some scripting in there, and we can use our triangle detailed information, but also the possibility to summarize, aggregate, and so on. And I can talk for a real long time about RDLC layouts, but why do that? Why go to RDLC if you could drink a coffee and enjoy life, go for a walk with Tex, my dog? The reason I have this slide in here is that if you're already using RDLC, fine, continue to do so. If you are not yet using RDLC, now is not a good moment to start. Because in the future, maybe, who knows, we might not have RDLC anymore, or it might become limited or more expensive to use. The reason is that RDLC technology comes from SQL Server Reporting Services, was introduced in the year 2000, and the latest officially supported release was in 2016. There is no support on it anymore. So basically, that means that if someone finds a security bug in RDLC, Microsoft is going to have to stop using that in SaaS immediately. So if they will find it, they need to stop with that. So they might be thinking about phasing this out because it's basically not supported anymore. It's not in the hands of the Business Central team, it's the SQL team. That simply don't support that because they have a new version of RDLC in Power BI. If you still would like to get started learning RDLC, there are some great resources online, and there's also an amazing book that you can have a look at with some guidelines and some examples. It's based on Navision, but if you go to my blog and my GitHub, github.com/srenders/blog, I tried to convert a few of the examples in my book based on Seaside to AL. That might also get you up and running, and lots of tips and tricks on working with tables and groupings and a matrix and different kinds of layouts and formatting and place and bottom and all of these features. All right. A lot of the interactive features of the RDLC layout no longer work in Business Central. Why? Because in Navision, we would render a report RDLC layout in the report viewer, which was the HTML version, which was interactive. In BC, we get the PDF export, so that's not always interactive. But okay, if you would like to know a few things about RDLC, then for example, it might be interesting to also take the standard sales invoice as an example. This one I usually prefer to edit in Visual Studio. All right. And what we typically see is that here we're also going to use tables to position information. Big difference between 1306 and 206 a long time ago is that header information is now in a table at the top of the body, and it used to be in the header. Okay. An advantage of being able to put something in the header is that you can have it repeated on every page. You can use expressions to determine when or not to show it. But to get data from the data set in the header, you have to use these nice workarounds like get data, set data, and there are also better ways of doing that. You might remember these from a long time ago, a Galaxy Far Array. But in 1306, no trace of that anymore. It's all in the header, easier to read, easier to maintain. Only one little problem, the table at the top of the body is only visible on the first page and not on the second or third and so on. But that's the RDLC layout, but a few workarounds that are still in here. You can always go a little bit deeper in this, or if you might have some detailed questions after the session, come and find me. I will always be happy to go a little bit deeper in RDLC layouts. The advantage is that we can use expression, we can dynamically show and hide things, like conditional formatting, conditional visibility, but I'm pretty sure we'll also get that in the future in the Word layout. So RDLC layouts, if you ask a customer, hey, how do you want the layout to look like? Do you need grouping? Do you need something special in the body and the footer and maybe on different pages, different information in body or footer? Do you want to visualize data in a table, matrix, or other visuals? Okay, these are all things we can do with RDLC. We can't really do that in the Word layout. All right, Excel layouts. That's also interesting to look at. I'm going a little bit faster because I'm running out of time, but no problem. You can create good data sets and also an Excel layout around it. And basically, let's say RDLC goes away, and then if you have union data items, will go to the Word layout. If you have joint data items, an Excel layout is really interesting to use. Even though I'm not using these very much in real life, they have a few advantages. Some links to official documentation, how to add comments, how to do all of these things. Nobody ever does, but there is some documentation about that. So what's a big advantage of using the Excel layout? It is that you can have multiple views on the same data, but there is a contract. So if you generate an Excel layout, you get a data sheet. Don't rename it, don't delete it. In that data sheet, there is a data table. Don't rename it, don't delete it. That's the contract with the layout. You can move it, but you cannot rename or delete it. You will also get some presentation sheets that you can create, and there's also a metadata sheet that if you would like to, you can delete. You get some extra options in there, translated captions and so on, so you can also indeed do multi-language Excel layouts. In Business Central, and that's where you can see the big advantage, Microsoft has now also added some Excel layouts for some reports that used to only have RDLC or a work layout, to make them a lot more interesting. Age accounts receivable, you can see the data, but there are a few slicers in there, and some other reports also. I've just taken a few, but there are actually quite a lot of these that now have an Excel layout. If you look at the Excel layouts, all right, then I have here an item availability dataset. Start with the item table, go to the ledger entries, and also include sales lines and purchase to be able to calculate availability. Going to add all of that in my data sets, and then I'm going to create an Excel layout to visualize that information. It takes a few seconds to load. Now, what do you typically do? You run the reports. There you have the layout that you can generate, save into the same folder, and then you can open it in Visual Studio Code. You have some data to play with. And what I have right here is a table with a pivot table with some information, also a pivot chart below that, and some other charts, and the possibility to slice and dice or to filter, for example, using Excel slicers. That's all very nice. These are all options that Excel has. You can work with all of these visualizations in Excel. What you need to be aware of is that you have your data sheet. Excuse me. This is the one. Where all of the data is from the different data items. Using that to create this report will be challenging. So, what do I typically do for Excel layouts? And you can provide information in your data items, joins, items, and then ledger entries, sales lines, and so on, unions. And then in Excel, it can be interesting to go to the data tab, and based on the information in the data table, to create a data model in Power Pivots. So you can open that table in Power Pivots. What then happens is that you have the original table with all of the information. You can then split it into multiple tables in Power Pivot. So based on the information in the data tab, I split that into new tables, one with only item information, one with ledgers, one with purchases, one with sales. So you split that out in different tables. And then there's also a possibility to create a data model in here. So I split out in multiple tables, then the item table, I linked it one-to-many with purchases, sales, and ledgers. Bless you. And then what you can also do is go back into the data view, and there's also a possibility to define a few measures in here if you know DAX. All of these things you can do in Excel. So starting from a flat data table, you can create kind of a star snowflake model in Excel, in Power Pivot, save it, and then also use that to generate pivot tables. So that's a big advantage. You can use all of these features of Excel. There are a lot more features, of course, also available. The advantage is that, okay, you have your data sets, and then a user can create that Excel layout and consume it. But there are other ways of working. And because for this to work, you need a developer that creates that data set for you. A few properties in Excel. Excel layout multiple data sheets. If you don't want to have one tab with the data, but one per data item, then you can do that. That's also quite interesting, especially with unions data items. All right, there's a new report explorer where you can find all of the reports. Report extensions, also wanted to mention that. With the report extension, you can add or change something in the data set of an existing report. If something is missing, you can add columns, you can add data items, and so on. But what I would like to say basically is be careful, because this can also happen. On the left side, if that is the, let's say, data set of the current report you want to extend, you might not want to extend it. So make sure the current data set is stable and extendable. The middle example, I will go into more details. That can happen with the report extension. You might be extending it, but it might end up in the wrong place. And then a report can be extended many times, but it will not make it a more better looking data set. That's the example at the right side. So be careful with that, especially developers. So for example, I have a report in here, 2 data items, customer, vendor. And basically what I would like to do is add more information in here, like contacts. And I'm going to add that after the vendor data item. It's one of the first report extensions I created. And when I ran the report, something strange was happening, because even though I had a lot more contacts than vendors, at runtime, I would always have exactly the same amount of contacts than vendors. When I looked at the data set, I found out, okay, something is wrong. And what is wrong? Well, I made a small mistake. This should not be at last, but at after. So be careful with that. Check your data before you add any layouts to it. But okay, for the rest, I think it can be really interesting to use. All right, the main focus of my presentation was on the report layouts. I also have a little bit of Power BI in here. I will not go into complete detail. That's not the objective of this session, but I added that in my PowerPoints, because if you have it, then you have the full picture. And for reporting, it's also really important. Why? Because I see developers and partners and companies spending a lot of time in developing report objects and data sets. They can't really reuse those. So Power BI might also be really interesting to have a look at. And it can do everything. It can show detailed information. It can also show highly aggregated information. There is a lot of documentation available online, how to create and get started with Power BI reports. Renato and I have also given a lot of sessions about that, so you can always come and ask us. We have some great learning journeys too at Platan Companion. But what I would like to show about Power BI reports is that using Power BI Desktop, you can connect to queries or web services, but queries are usually better. Power BI Desktop is free. You build your report in Power BI Desktop, you send it to the service online, and there you can distribute and share. A lot of visualization possibilities based on APIs, because these are usually faster than web services. In Power BI Desktop, get data, you connect directly to Business Central, you have all of your data sets in there, and you can get started. Another way to get started is online in the service by creating a data flow, Gen 1 or one of the older ones. And the difference is that in Power BI Desktop, I will have all the data in my one report, build the data model, and have the report available. If you're going to use data flows or a data lake or something else, then basically you're going to fetch the data from Business Central into a central repository, which can be consumed in Power BI reports, but also Excel and other tools. Well, a few slides on that. On-prem is also a possibility for Power BI. But okay, if you would like Power BI Desktop and the service online to be able to find your on-prem data, it needs to find a way to the server, so you might need to install and configure that Power BI gateway. Any kind of data model in Power BI, use Star or Snowflake. Performance-wise, scaling, and that's always the most interesting thing to do. The fact table in the middle, dimensional tables around it. If you need links in your dimensional tables, that's also possible. Data model design, part science, part art. And I can continue with some best practices, tips and tricks, and so on. And I can create some really great looking reports. Okay. We go to Power BI. We can create reports like about item availability, with the possibility to slice and dice and drill down, see some high-level information, some trends, and some real details that I can also have a look at and filtering. There's a simple report that I've created. What can we also do? We can create a dashboard. Dashboard is like a helicopter view on one or multiple visuals from one or multiple reports. So you can start with some high-level information. And if you click on one of these visuals, you will then be redirected to the report where it's coming from. This can then be also added into an app that you can very easily share and distribute. And then Power BI can also work with scorecards. So simply would like to highlight there are a lot of elements available in Power BI, lots of different visualizations. And usually they remain in Power BI. Of course, we can embed those in Business Central, and there we see quite a lot of enhancements coming in. Because, for example, on the Role Center or any other page, you can have multiple Power BI parts now that link to different reports. And there's also a possibility to not show a report, but for example, one visual of a report, a scorecard, and also a dashboard. This can now also be embedded in here. Now, if you would like to work with Excel layouts or send the data to Excel, interesting to know is that you can export this into Excel. However, if you have a report which has an Excel layout, you can simply open Excel. And from that Excel layout, there's also a possibility to go into the Data tab and get and select data from your Power Platform for the Power BI data sets and so on. That's the reason I also wanted to include this in this presentation. Okay, don't want to go too deep, but I have some detailed information on the slides, but that was normally out of the scope of this session. And you can have some nice visuals in there too. Last but not least, Microsoft is also heavily investing in Power BI. There are a few out-of-the-box apps that you can also install. These include APIs, these include the reports, and also a setup that you can do. All right. To conclude, tips, tricks, and best practices. If there is one thing I would like you to remember, then it is think about data aggregation and data granularity. What level of detail is required, and based on that, select the best tool. So there's a fight between the user wanting the details and not having them in your reports. Give power to the users. Think about all of the different possibilities that you have, all of the ways to consume data coming from Business Central, but maybe also from other applications. There are a few online places where you can find more information, like Learn, aka.ms/bc reporting, and aka.ms/bc tech for some more detailed examples. All right, I have 1 or 2 minutes left. Any questions? Go ahead. We'll give you the microphone.
Hi. You mentioned that Microsoft might have to drop RDLC layouts if any security issues or something arises. So in your opinion, should we remake our, let's say, sales invoice layout to use Word and sacrifice some conditional formatting, or is it fine to wait for...
I think at the moment is indeed come to stop investing in RDLC and try to do it in the Word layout. The Word layout is less flexible, so that might require to put that flexibility in AL code instead of in the layouts. Yeah. These are things I would highly recommend you to start investigating, so that whenever you might have to do the move from RDLC to something else, that you are ready. Yeah. Thank you. I'll give you a t-shirt in a moment.
Hello, my question is, I guess, a bit of an addition to the question the colleague asked here. Should we recommend our clients that have like more of a higher standard of security to completely not use the custom layouts that they can add themselves to the system? Because, well, you can, in fact, add a custom RDLC layout yourself into the Business Central.
You can still use them. So in the report layouts page, you can start from an existing layout and create a new based on RDLC, based on the Word ones. You can still use those. I'm not saying you should stop completely with RDLC right now. Only thing I'm saying,
I guess we should at least limit.
Yeah, you should be prepared for someday in the future, maybe not being able to use it anymore.
I see. I see.
So start your journey right now into learning more about the word layout and try to have the word layout replace the RDLC.
Seems a little bit sad for me, at least personally, for the RDLC. Like, wouldn't it be just possible to just fix the port builder?
Yeah, but I think the problem is there. It's not in the hands of the business central
See.
team. It's a server team, and it's like old, obsoleted technology, and for them it's game over. Yeah.
I see. Thank you.
Hello, Steven. My question is also again in the same thread. Certain things, if we look at, for example, sales invoice word layout, it's more the simplified version. It's not as complex as the RDLC.
Yes.
So in future, do we look forward to Microsoft to having all those features in word layout? And second question in the same thread is certain requirements such as having QR code in layout. Would that be possible with the word layouts? In RDLC, we could also do HTML formatting within the cell. Will we have those features in word layout?
Very good questions. And I will say right now, it can be very, let's say, challenging and doing everything in Word what is possible in RDLC because Word has many limitations. That's the reason I think why there is no the word add-in control, which is being added by Microsoft currently with limited functionality. However, Kenny from Microsoft is highly actively communicating about that on the BC Yammer group. And there recently he asked feedback from everyone about what do you need to be in the word layout, what you currently do in RDLC to be able to start moving completely. And based on all of that feedback, I think they will add all of these features in that plugin. I think the end goal or idea is giving Word via that add-in all of the things that you need to be able to have them fully replace the RDLC layout. I think that's the idea. Okay. Thank you. You can come and fetch your T-shirt. Who was it?
Yeah, so up till now, I personally used never used the data model in Excel, but I used the Power Query.
Yep.
So, what's your thought about that? What's better, or is that a personal taste? Or
well, I like Power Query a lot because the Power Query you have in Excel is the same that you have in Power BI Desktop, and you can do ETL, extract, transform data, and then load it in there. So with Power Query, you get some great features in Excel. So what I also frequently do is the data in the data tab that comes in, load it into Power Query, do some calculated columns, clean up the data, change the data types. So I highly recommend you to use it. However, when you generate that the report, you might have to click on that refresh button for everything to load or to reload. When the Excel opens, normally it should go automatically, but I notice it's not always the case. Power Pivot is also something you can use in Excel, but I don't do it that frequently because you can also create all of the data models, for example, in Power BI. So you can create a Power BI report with only a data model, all of the relationships and the measures and the calculations. Publish it to the service, and then in an Excel layout also connect to that. And the advantage is that not only you have all of the Power Query from the Power BI report coming in, but also the complete data model and the relationships.